Hey everyone, Real Mama Eagle here, also known as Key, and today we're here to talk about the best and worst characters in every single Pokemon generation. The opinions in this video are just based on my personal experience. Someone watching may feel differently, and if you do, talk to me in the comment section down below. Hit a like button, hit the subscribe button, also ding that bell so you know when videos are dropping. And I do want to say that I really appreciate all the love on my very first video. It meant the world to me, and I'm excited to keep making wonderful Pokemon content for you all. Now let's get started. Let's start with Generation 1. Now, Generation 1 may seem like a stretch from me just because Gen 1 lacks a bit of character and story development, but let's start with the best character. The best character in Gen 1 is actually you, the protagonist. You go around Kanto just bopping along, very wholesome, like with the blessing from your mother, going on a great Pokemon journey to ultimately defeat the champion after collecting badges. You are a hero because you defeat Giovanni, you defeat Team Rocket, and ultimately restore peace to Kanto. For the time being anyway. The worst characters in Gen 1 are surprisingly not Giovanni, Team Rocket, and Blaine because they actually make the game that much more interesting. But there's two characters that stick out to me in particular, and they're random NPCs, and they're both old men. Let's start with the old man in Viridian City. He's kind of a tool. He blocks your path and he's angry. He's kind of like rude to you just because he didn't have a cup of coffee. Now, I'm a coffee lover, but I've never ruined anyone's day just because I didn't get my latte in the morning. The second worst character in Gen 1 would definitely be the old man outside of the Celadon Gym, who is peeking in on Erica and her fellow trainers. Now, don't get me wrong, according to my extensive research, Erica's about 18 or 19, which would make her of age, but the old man creeping in at a bunch of young women is a bit much for me. It was so bad that in the Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee remakes, they even changed a man's dialogue from hee hee, this gym is full of women to hee hee, this gym is full of strong trainers. Gen 2 was also tough to pull from character-wise because it does lack a bit in story development, but in my opinion, the best character in Gen 2 is Lance. We're gonna ignore the fact that he has 3 Dragonite. Why, Game Freak? Why? But Lance is a pretty good stand-up guy. He battles you with the utmost respect. He's very generous. He gives you a thrilling battle, and he helps you ultimately defeat Team Rocket in Mahogany Town and restores peace to Lake of Rage by not forcing the Pokemon to evolve. So an overall good guy, and it's really nice to see a champion outside of his element just walking around. Pretty cool. The worst characters in Gen 2 are unfortunately 2 women, and they are actually worse than Team Rocket and your rival, which is saying something. But let's start with Whitney. We all know Whitney. It's bad enough that we have to deal with her Miltank, but then we have to deal with her pretty terrible attitude. Whitney brags before the battle, tells you how good she is, and that she just got into Pokemon, but as soon as you beat her, she gaslights you. She starts crying, she calls you a meanie, you have to talk to her friend for her to calm down, and then when she calms down, she's like, oh, here, you want a badge? Yeah, Whitney, that's why I'm here. But she's a total sore loser. Whitney, you have to learn how to take an L. But as bad as Whitney is, Claire is actually worse. If you don't know Claire, she's the 8th gym leader in Gen 2, and she's a complete sore loser. She has a killer team. She brags about how tough she is with dragons. You fight her, you have a great battle, but she refuses to believe that she lost to you. So she sends you on a mission to the Dragon's Den where you have to use a very annoying HM in Whirlpool. You have to surf, you have to fight some trainers, and then you have to go through a quiz to prove that you're somehow worthy, even though you already won the battle. And then after you do good in the quiz, she comes in to the temple in the Dragon's Den and assumes that you would fail. Claire is a total jerk, honestly. But Whitney and Claire, definitely 2 of the worst characters in Gen 2. Generation 3 was such a huge step up in character and story development, and there's so many good characters and bad ones to choose from. But as far as the best character in Gen 3, I had to go with my boy Steven. Steven is an amazing champion who gives you one of the more thrilling battles in champion battles besides Cynthia in Gen 4. But what makes Steven special is the work he does in the community. You see him out and about. He gives you items to progress through your journey. You also bond with him and get to learn a lot about him. So he's a good all-around guy. Now, as far as the worst characters in Gen 3, this hurts my soul a bit because I love Archie and Maxie so much, but we have to be honest and admit that their plans are ultimately very destructive and dangerous. Archie wants to expand the sea so that people in Pokemon have more fun places to swim. That's all good and fine, but what happens to the population that can't swim? Do they just drown, Archie? What happens there? And think about the Pokemon that are not water Pokemon. What happens to them? So it kind of only favors a bit of the population. Then you go over to Maxie, who wants to expand the land, and that dries up the earth, dries up the planet, dries up everything. What are we gonna drink, Maxie? And what's going to happen to the Pokemon that aren't fire Pokemon or aren't ground Pokemon? Both ideas were wild, but they were very poorly executed and ultimately dangerous to society. And unfortunately, that makes Archie and Maxie the worst. Generation 4 was top tier as far as story development and characters, and there's a lot to choose from here again. Let's start with the best character in Gen 4. I have to go with Cynthia. Yes, I have a bit of a champion bias in these picks, but a lot of the champions are actually really cool. Cynthia is probably the coolest. She gives you the best battle you've probably ever had. Her Garchomp is also very scary. And please don't battle her in black and white because she's stronger in that game. So watch out. But what makes Cynthia so awesome is that you naturally bond with her as you did Steven. You meet Cynthia multiple times in the game. You actually meet her pretty early on in Eterna City. She talks to you about Team Galactic and what their plans are. You meet up with her again later, and there's a cool bit of lore when you talk about her and her grandma, and then you have that moment in Celestial Town. And then she ultimately respects you before and after the battle. So Cynthia is iconic and still talked about to this day. Also, she was so OP in the remakes. Oh my goodness. The worst character in Gen 4 has to be Cyrus. This is tough because I do like Cyrus's character, but Cyrus, also like Archie and Maxie, did not have well thought out plans. So he wanted to use Dialga and Palkia to start a new world and start everything from fresh and destroy everything. But what happens to everyone once you destroy said world? Cyrus, you get to pick and choose what people come to this alleged new world with you. What happens to your family, Cyrus? What happens to your friend, Cyrus? Does Cyrus have pets? What happens to his pets? I don't know. But it's ultimately a very destructive plan like Archie and Maxie's. And Cyrus is pretty selfish in this situation, only thinks about himself. It could also be interpreted that Cyrus really doesn't care about his Team Galactic counterparts and friends. So unfortunately, he is the worst character in this generation. Generation 5 has a plethora of great characters and personalities, but for the average person that played Generation 5, I think it's easy to say that the character that stands out as the best overall is N. N is your pseudo-rival that you meet early in Accumula Town. He's the king of Team Plasma, but he shows a lot of respect for you after battles. You share a Ferris wheel ride in Nabasa City, where he actually tells you a bit about himself and he shares a bit of Team Plasma's plans. You ultimately bond with N throughout the journey. It's never a malicious rivalry. You battle, he says nice things to you, he goes on about his way. Despite having evil people in Team Plasma like all the sages and Getsus, N actually seems very pure and genuinely cares about the Pokemon, and you two share a wonderful battle at the end of the game before he bids you farewell. But you felt a friendship with N, and that's what made him so special. You saw him go from rough around the edges to ultimately becoming a very polished person with a soft side, and then you see him reappear in black and white too, and it was just, I was fangirling a lot. The worst character in Generation 5, this is probably an unpopular opinion, but I have to go with Bianca. Bianca's a sweetheart, don't get me wrong, but Bianca is very flighty, and Bianca sort of has the attention span of my 5-year-old son. But what makes Bianca very annoying is the blatant disrespect she had for her parents right away. Her dad doesn't want her to go on a journey, and I don't think her dad was really in the wrong. Yeah, you gotta figure Bianca, Charon, and you in that game were what, like 12? Of course her dad doesn't want her to go on a journey around the world. It's dangerous. But Bianca yells at her father, leaves the house without even saying goodbye, and she totally dismisses him again later in Nabasa City, so she's kind of rude in that aspect. But I will say that Bianca got a lovely glow up in black and white too. It was awesome to see her be Professor Juniper's assistant and ultimately mature as a person. Generation 6 definitely has some cool characters despite the story lacking a bit, so I went with 2 choices for best here. Yes, I cheated a bit, I'm sorry. But one of the best 2 characters in Gen 6 is Karina. Karina is a gym leader in Shallower City. She gives you probably one of the decent gym battle fights in the entire region of Kalos, and she gives you a Mega Lucario, which is pretty awesome. She clearly respects you as a trainer. She gives you one of her prize Pokemon, and she bids you a great wish on your journey. She's also the one that teaches you a bulk of what you learned about Mega Evolution, which was a nice little part in the game, despite lacking a bit of story. I would say the second best character in Generation 6 is Lysandre. I know that's unpopular. I'm sorry. And I know he's a villain, and it contradicts what I said about Cyrus, Archie, and Maxie, but Lysandre is a villain the game needed because Team Flare would be very unbearable without Lysandre. And it's funny because Lysandre sort of pulls you in as though he's looking out for you in the beginning. He kind of shows you a bit of friendliness. He shows you a bit of attention as far as like the journey and what you're doing. But then there's a total pivot later. He goes completely evil, and it's a plot twist the game desperately needed. So I would definitely say he's one of the best just because of the spice he added to the story. Now, the worst character in Gen 6 is your rivals. Except for Caleb. Caleb's actually pretty cool. God bless Shauna's heart, but she talks about her feelings 24/7, and I just wanted to go catch Pokemon. Tierno, all he did was dance. I didn't know if he wanted to be a Pokemon trainer or audition for America's Next Best Dance Crew. And Trevor, Trevor was just giving know-it-all 24/7. And they stopped you pretty often, all of them. So that group as a whole kind of made the journey a bit irritating as far as you wanting to progress, and then Tierno stops you with dance moves, or Trevor stops you with a random Pokemon fact that you probably already knew. But they're definitely the most annoying characters in Gen 6. Some would say Gen 7 has the best character development and story development out of the series besides Gen 5. So there's a lot of characters we could choose from here. But as far as my personal best, I would have to go with Guzma. Guzma makes a very cringe Team Skull better. You're probably thinking, Key, why do you like villains so much? But what's Pokemon without some villains in it? One thing I like about Guzma is his swag, and he has just the right amount of evil without being too obnoxious or being too destructive. Archie, Maxie, Cyrus. But Guzma's really cool because Guzma has a great background, and I could argue that Guzma's a bit misunderstood. He ultimately became evil under the influence of Lusamine because she was one of the only people that showed him attention as a trainer. So naturally, it could be just that, you know, Guzma wanted friends and Lusamine was the only person there. But one thing I like about Guzma is that after the post game happens and you're champion, Guzma actually disbands Team Skull, is on the beach living a simple life, decides he doesn't want to be a criminal anymore. So shout out to Game Freak and Gen 7 for actually doing character development on a criminal, which was really, really cool. Also, Guzma might have the greatest battle theme of all time, besides Cynthia and Bede and a few others, but it's top tier. Now, the worst character in Gen 7, I would have to say, is Lily. I know this is very harsh because Lily is a sweetheart and ultimately she is an absent and slightly wild mother, Lusamine. But Lily is very annoying. She stops you a lot consistently, and her pushing at her bag for some reason irks me. I don't know why. But Lily talks so much and is very distracting from your journey. Some people might say Hao is probably the worst character in Gen 7. I disagree because it seems to me that all Hao wanted to do was catch Pokemon and eat, and spiritually I can relate to that. But Lily, as sweet as she is, definitely pulls away from my experience because the forced dialogue and the fact that she kind of comes off as a bit needy. Despite my feelings that Gen 8 has a lackluster story overall, there are actually some pretty great characters in the game. I would say the best character in Gen 8 is definitely Sonia. Sonia's a sweetheart you meet early in the game. She's actually the granddaughter of Professor Magnolia. And one thing I liked about that was it was the first time we ever saw the passing of the torch between a professor and their successor. Hey, that rhymed. But Sonia's really cool. She always helps you on your journey. And Sonia actually enlightens you about a lot of the history that is in Galar. And she's ultimately there through some tough situations for you in the game. Plus, her jacket, her fit, her and her Yamper are so freaking cute. I would say the worst character in Gen 8 has to be Hop. Is there really another question? Hop is incredibly annoying. For starters, he walks around with a giant chip on his shoulder, and his biggest mission in life is to be Leon, who is arguably the worst champion in the entire series. Aim higher, Hop. Hop is really annoying because he holds that chip on his shoulder and he ultimately talks down to himself. He lacks a lot of self-confidence. If he had confidence, he'd be so much more likable. Hop does have a killer battle theme though, but I think Game Freak did that because they wanted to distract us from how terrible he actually is. But Hop is definitely the worst character in Generation 8. Do you agree or disagree? I want to know in the comments section below who you think are the best and worst characters in each Pokemon generation. Talk to me in the comments so we can have a fun dialogue about it. Look forward to my very next video and drop any video ideas in the comments below for me as well. Don't forget to hit the like button and also subscribe. Ding that bell so you know when my videos are up. I do want to thank you all for watching today. I am Real Mama Eagle.